The applause inside Madison Square Garden rolled like thunder. June 10th, 1972. Nearly 20,000 people had packed every seat inside the legendary arena, waiting for one man whose voice had already become part of American history. The lights suddenly disappeared. The crowd erupted. A single spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. Elvis Presley stepped into the light, wearing a dazzling white jumpsuit embroidered with golden eagles, a red scarf hanging loosely around his neck, and the unmistakable smile that had captivated millions across the world. The screams became deafening. Women cried. Men stood on their chairs. Teenagers waved homemade signs. Older couples smiled as if they had traveled back 10 years. The orchestra struck the opening notes. Elvis lifted the microphone. "Good evening, New York." The building shook from the roar that answered him. Nobody realized they were about to witness a night that would be remembered for generations. Not because of the music, but because of a single decision that would forever change 2 lives. Backstage, only minutes before walking onto the stage, Elvis had been unusually quiet. His longtime friend Charlie Hodge adjusted the guitar strap while studying Elvis carefully. "You all right, EP?" Elvis looked toward the arena entrance where thousands of voices echoed like crashing waves. "You ever get the feeling," he paused, "that somebody out there tonight needs more than a concert?" Charlie smiled. "You've always thought that." Elvis sighed. "My mama used to say, 'God doesn't put people in your path without a reason.'" Charlie chuckled. "Then maybe somebody's waiting." Elvis nodded slowly. "I guess we'll find out." Almost 300 miles away, 9-year-old Tommy Harper had barely survived the trip. Every bump in the road had caused pain that his frail body could hardly endure. His mother, Margaret, kept glancing at him from the driver's seat. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" Tommy forced a smile. "I'm fine." He wasn't. The doctors had told Margaret something no mother should ever hear. Acute leukemia. Aggressive. Treatment had stopped working. The latest prognosis had been devastating. Weeks. Maybe a month. That was all they could promise. She had cried all night after hearing those words, not because she couldn't accept losing her son, but because she couldn't bear the thought of him leaving the world without seeing the one person who had given him hope every time he felt too weak to keep fighting. Elvis Presley. Every hospital stay, every painful injection, every sleepless night, Tommy listened to Elvis. His tiny cassette player had become his best friend. When nurses changed IV bags, Elvis sang. When chemotherapy made him sick, Elvis sang. When fear overwhelmed him, Elvis sang. 3 weeks earlier, Margaret had written a letter. She never expected anyone famous to read it. She simply needed someone to know. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Presley, my son Tommy has loved your music since he was 5 years old. The doctors don't believe he has much time left. He only has one dream, to hear you sing in person. If that never happens, please know your music already gave him more strength than medicine ever could. Thank you. A grateful mother." She mailed it without hope. No reply ever came. Eventually, she accepted that the letter had probably disappeared among thousands of others. But then, 3 days before the concert, a plain envelope arrived. Inside were 2 front-row tickets. No explanation, no signature, only one sentence typed neatly across the page. "We hope Tommy enjoys the show." Margaret burst into tears. She didn't know who had sent them. She didn't care. It felt like a miracle. The arena lights flashed across thousands of excited faces. Tommy couldn't stop smiling despite the exhaustion painted across his pale skin. His baseball cap covered the hair chemotherapy had stolen months earlier. His oversized denim jacket hid how painfully thin he'd become. Around his neck was a navy blue scarf. Margaret had tied it gently before leaving the hotel. "You look handsome," Tommy grinned. "You think Elvis will see me?" She smiled through moist eyes. Maybe, secretly. She doubted it. How could one man notice a single child among 20,000 people? Still, she let herself believe, because hope was all either of them had left. Backstage, one of Elvis's assistants hurried toward Charlie Hodge, carrying a stack of fan letters that had somehow survived weeks of sorting. "You probably don't need these now," Charlie laughed. "Definitely not." One envelope slipped from the stack and landed at Elvis's feet. He bent down. The handwriting caught his attention. Simple, careful, almost trembling. He opened it. As he read, the laughter around him disappeared. The room became silent. Charlie watched Elvis's expression slowly change. "What is it?" Elvis folded the letter carefully. "A little boy." Charlie waited. "He's dying." The words hung heavily in the room. Elvis looked toward the tunnel leading to the stage. "You think he's here tonight?" Charlie shrugged. "Could be." Elvis slipped the letter inside his jacket pocket. "If he is," he looked toward the blinding lights beyond the curtain. "I hope I find him." The concert exploded into life. "C.C. Ryder!" The audience danced. "Burning Love!" The building nearly lifted off its foundation. "Proud Mary!" People sang every word. Tommy clapped until his hands hurt. His cheeks glowed with happiness that no medicine had managed to create in months. Even Margaret forgot, if only for a few songs, that her son was dying. She watched him laugh, really laugh. The kind of laughter she hadn't heard since before the diagnosis. She silently thanked God. Even if tonight was the last joyful memory they'd ever share, it was enough. As the evening continued, Elvis found himself scanning the audience more often than usual. Every time the spotlight swept across the first rows, his eyes searched. Children, families, faces, nothing. He wondered whether the boy from the letter had made it, or perhaps he had become too sick to travel. The thought lingered in his mind. Song after song, smile after smile, yet something inside him refused to let the letter go. Tommy had begun feeling weaker. The excitement had drained what little energy remained. Margaret noticed his breathing becoming heavier. "You want to leave?" Tommy shook his head immediately. "No." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Please. I just want—" He looked toward the stage where Elvis laughed with the audience between songs. "One more." She squeezed his hand. "Okay." The orchestra prepared for one of the night's most emotional performances. The opening strings of An American Trilogy echoed through Madison Square Garden. The audience fell silent. Even those who had been cheering moments earlier became still. Elvis closed his eyes. He sang with every ounce of emotion he possessed. The lyrics filled every corner of the arena. Thousands listened in complete silence. Halfway through the song, a movement caught Elvis's attention. 3 rows from the stage, a small figure, a little boy whose body seemed almost too fragile to remain standing. The child held a handmade sign against his chest with trembling hands. The spotlight briefly swept across it. Elvis could barely make out the words, Your music keeps me alive. Time seemed to stop. Elvis's heart pounded. The blue scarf, the pale face, the baseball cap, the letter. It was him, Tommy Harper, the little boy whose mother had written with fading hope. Elvis's voice faltered for the first time that evening. The orchestra continued playing. The audience looked up in confusion. Elvis stared directly into the third row. Tommy looked back with wide, hopeful eyes. Neither of them blinked. For one unforgettable moment, the entire arena disappeared. Only a world-famous singer and a dying little boy remained. For several long seconds, no one inside Madison Square Garden understood why Elvis Presley had stopped singing. The orchestra continued playing softly, confused by the sudden silence. The audience exchanged puzzled glances. Some thought Elvis had forgotten the lyrics. Others assumed there was a technical problem. But Elvis wasn't looking at the band. He wasn't looking at the audience. His eyes remained fixed on one small boy sitting in the third row, Tommy, the child from the letter, the little fighter whose mother had begged for one unforgettable memory before time ran out. Elvis slowly lowered the microphone. His breathing became heavier. He had performed thousands of concerts. He had faced screaming crowds, television cameras, presidents, movie stars, and royalty. Yet nothing had ever made him feel as vulnerable as looking into the eyes of that little boy. Charlie Hodge stepped closer. "Everything all right, EP?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. Without taking his eyes off Tommy, he quietly whispered, "That's him." Charlie followed Elvis's gaze. "The boy?" Elvis nodded. "The one whose mama wrote me." Charlie looked toward the child. Even from the stage, Tommy's condition was painfully obvious. His face was ghostly pale. His shoulders were impossibly thin beneath the oversized denim jacket. His hands trembled as he held the homemade sign. Charlie swallowed hard. My God. The audience had become completely silent. 20,000 people. Not a single cheer, not a single whisper. Only the soft echo of violins lingering through the arena. Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage. He spoke into the microphone, his voice calmer than anyone expected. "Folks," he paused, "I need just a little moment." Nobody complained. Nobody shouted. The atmosphere inside the arena changed instantly. People sensed something important was happening, something far bigger than entertainment. Tommy looked down, embarrassed. He thought perhaps he had done something wrong. Maybe standing during the song had distracted Elvis. Maybe security would ask him to sit. He quietly lowered his sign. Margaret gently touched his shoulder. "It's okay." But her own heart had begun racing. She noticed Elvis still looking directly toward them. "No," she whispered. "He can't possibly." Elvis pointed gently toward the third row. "Young man!" The microphone carried his voice across the arena. Tommy slowly looked up. "I believe you're holding a sign." The audience turned toward the child. Thousands of heads shifted at once. Tommy froze. Margaret squeezed his hand. "It's all right." Elvis smiled warmly. "Would you mind showing everybody what it says?" Tommy hesitated. His tiny hands shook. Then he slowly raised the cardboard sign again. The spotlight operator instinctively followed Elvis's gaze. A brilliant beam illuminated the words, "Your music keeps me alive." The audience read it together. A wave of emotion swept through the arena. Some people covered their mouths. Others wiped tears from their eyes. The words carried a weight no performance could ever equal. Elvis looked away for a moment. He couldn't hide the tears forming in his eyes. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "You know," he began quietly, "folks write me letters every day." He reached into his jacket. Carefully, he unfolded a familiar envelope. "I received one from a mother." Margaret's eyes widened. Her heart nearly stopped. The letter. He had actually read it. Elvis continued. "She told me about her little boy." His voice cracked. "She said music helped him smile when nothing else could." Silence. Absolute silence. No cameras flashed. No applause interrupted him. Everyone listened. Margaret began crying before Elvis even looked toward her. She had spent weeks believing her letter had vanished forever, yet Elvis had carried it in his jacket all night. Not backstage, not in a dressing room. With him, close to his heart. Tommy tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mom!" She couldn't answer. Her tears said everything. Elvis slowly stepped off the front of the stage. Security guards instinctively moved closer. Manager Joe Esposito quickly approached. "Elvis," he whispered urgently. "We don't usually—" Elvis raised one hand. "It's all right." Joe stopped talking. He had known Elvis long enough to recognize that look. When Elvis made up his mind, no one changed it. The front row fans carefully stepped aside. Security created a narrow path. Elvis walked directly toward Tommy. No spotlight followed. No dramatic music played. Only thousands of people watching in complete silence. Each step felt unbelievably personal. Tommy's heartbeat pounded inside his ears. He couldn't believe what was happening. "Mom!" "I know." "Is he really?" "I know." When Elvis finally reached him, he didn't stand above the boy. Instead, he slowly knelt until they were eye level. The king of rock and roll, kneeling before a child. Tommy stared into Elvis's familiar blue eyes. "They're really blue," he whispered almost to himself. Elvis laughed softly. "So I've been told." The audience chuckled gently. The tension eased for just a moment. Elvis noticed Tommy's scarf. "Navy blue." Tommy nodded. "My favorite color." "It looks good on you." "My mom tied it." Elvis smiled toward Margaret. "You did a fine job, ma'am." Margaret could barely speak. "Thank you, Mr. Presley." Elvis shook his head. "Tonight," he said warmly, "I'm just Elvis." He looked back at Tommy. "So, I hear you've been listening to my records." Tommy smiled. "Every day." "Every single day?" Tommy nodded. "When the medicine hurts." Elvis's smile slowly faded. "When I'm scared." The arena became silent again. "When I can't sleep." Another pause. Tommy looked down. "And when I think I might not wake up." A collective gasp spread through the audience. Even seasoned security guards fought back tears. Charlie turned away for a moment, unable to hide his emotions. Elvis gently placed one hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You know something?" Tommy looked up. "When I was your age, I got scared too." Tommy looked surprised. "You did?" "Oh, yes. I was just a skinny kid from Mississippi. I didn't know where life was taking me. But my mama always told me," he smiled softly, "when fear gets loud, let love be louder." Tommy repeated the words quietly. "Let love be louder." Elvis carefully reached toward the navy blue scarf around Tommy's neck. "May I?" Tommy nodded. Elvis untied it slowly. Everyone watched. No one understood why. Then Elvis removed the bright red scarf from around his own neck. The scarf every fan recognized, the scarf he often handed to lucky audience members during concerts. But this time, it felt different, much different. He gently wrapped the red scarf around Tommy's neck with the same care a father might show his son. There. Tommy looked down in disbelief. "This," he whispered, "is yours." Elvis smiled. "It is now." The audience erupted into applause. Not loud, not wild. It was something deeper. A standing ovation born from love rather than excitement. People cried openly. Some embraced complete strangers beside them. Even musicians in the orchestra quietly wiped away tears. Tommy carefully touched the scarf. "It smells like your cologne." The innocent comment made Elvis laugh through his tears. "Well, I reckon it does." Tommy looked at him with complete sincerity. "I'm never taking it off." Elvis reached into his pocket once more. He pulled out a guitar pick, a small object worth almost nothing, yet somehow it carried the weight of a lifetime. "I want you to keep this, too." Tommy accepted it with trembling hands as though it were made of gold. "I'll protect it forever." Elvis smiled. "I believe you will." Then Tommy asked a question that no one expected. "Mr. Elvis?" "Yes, son?" "If," Tommy hesitated, "if I get too sick," his voice became almost inaudible, "will you sing one song with me tonight?" The question struck Elvis like lightning. He looked into the little boy's hopeful eyes, then toward the thousands of people waiting patiently. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. He stood up, looked toward the orchestra, and raised his hand. "I think," he said into the microphone, "this concert just found its most important performer." The crowd exploded with emotion as Elvis extended his hand toward Tommy. The little boy looked at it, then slowly reached out to take it. For a brief moment, Tommy simply stared at Elvis's outstretched hand. His small fingers trembled, not because he was afraid, because he couldn't believe this was real. Only a few hours earlier, he had hoped Elvis might notice him from the stage. Now, the greatest entertainer in America was inviting him to stand beside him before nearly 20,000 people. Margaret gently squeezed her son's shoulder. "Go on, sweetheart." Tommy looked up at his mother. "What if I mess up?" She smiled through tears. "You couldn't. You've already made tonight unforgettable." Tommy slowly placed his tiny hand into Elvis's. Elvis closed his fingers gently around it. The difference in size between their hands struck everyone watching. One belonged to a global icon. The other belonged to a child fighting for another sunrise. The audience rose to their feet as Elvis carefully helped Tommy onto the stage. The applause wasn't wild. It wasn't the screaming excitement usually heard during an Elvis concert. It was something softer, warmer. People weren't applauding a celebrity. They were applauding courage. Every step Tommy took required effort. The chemotherapy had robbed him of much of his strength. His legs shook. Without saying a word, Elvis wrapped one arm around the boy's shoulders. "Take your time." There was no rush. For the first time that evening, 20,000 people were willing to wait as long as one little boy needed. Charlie Hodge quietly brought Elvis's acoustic guitar. He leaned close. "You sure about this?" Elvis smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." Charlie nodded. "I'll tell the orchestra." Within seconds, the musicians understood. The planned set list was forgotten. Tonight would no longer follow rehearsals. It would follow the heart. Tommy stood beside Elvis beneath the bright spotlight. The lights were warmer than he imagined. The arena looked enormous. Rows upon rows of faces disappeared into the darkness. His knees began shaking. Elvis noticed immediately. "Nervous?" Tommy nodded. "A little." Elvis laughed softly. "So am I." Tommy looked surprised. "You?" "Every single concert." The audience chuckled. "I just learned something." "What?" "Everybody gets scared." Tommy smiled. "Even kings?" Elvis laughed. "Especially kings." The laughter eased everyone's emotions. For a moment, it felt less like an arena, more like a family gathered inside one very large living room. Elvis adjusted the microphone downward. "There we go." He looked at Tommy. "I hear you've been singing along to my records." Tommy nodded proudly. "I know almost every word." "Almost?" "I still mess up one verse." Elvis leaned closer. "So do I." The crowd laughed again. Then Elvis looked toward the audience. "I'd like you all to meet somebody." He placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "This young man has shown more courage than most grown men ever will." The applause echoed once again. Tommy lowered his head shyly. Elvis continued. "His mama wrote me a letter. I carried it with me tonight. Not because I'm important," he paused, "but because sometimes someone else's story reminds us what really matters." Silence settled across the arena. Elvis looked toward Margaret. "Ma'am?" She stood slowly. He smiled. "You raised yourself one brave little boy." Margaret covered her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I've been trying." "You've done more than try," Elvis answered. "You've loved him every single day." The audience applauded Margaret. She had never experienced anything like it. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. She was simply a mother who refused to stop believing. Elvis looked back at Tommy. "So, what do you want to sing?" Tommy answered immediately. "Can't help falling in love." Elvis smiled. "I had a feeling you'd pick that one." He sat on a simple wooden stool placed near the center of the stage. Then he looked at Tommy. "Come here." Tommy sat beside him. The guitar rested across Elvis's knee. The arena became completely still. Not even photographers moved. Everyone sensed history unfolding. Elvis gently strummed the first chords. Soft, warm, almost like a lullaby. No orchestra, no dramatic lighting changes, just one guitar, one legendary voice, and one little boy. Elvis began singing. "Wise men say..." His rich voice filled every corner of Madison Square Garden. When he reached the next line, he stopped. He nodded toward Tommy. The boy looked terrified. Elvis smiled reassuringly. "Your turn." Tommy swallowed, then quietly sang. "Only fools rush in." His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked. It trembled. But it carried something far more powerful than perfection. Hope. The audience erupted into applause. Tommy's face lit up with amazement. "They liked it." Elvis leaned toward him. "They loved it." Verse after verse. Their voices blended together. Sometimes Tommy forgot the words. Elvis whispered them quietly before the audience even noticed. Sometimes Tommy became short of breath. Elvis slowed the tempo. The song was no longer about rhythm. It was about giving a child every second possible to enjoy the moment. No one cared how long it took. Halfway through the song, Tommy suddenly stopped singing. He lowered his head. His breathing became shallow. Margaret immediately stood. Her heart dropped. "Tommy?" The smile disappeared from Elvis's face. "You all right, buddy?" Tommy nodded weakly. He struggled for air. "I'm tired." The arena instantly became tense. Several doctors in the audience identified themselves. One physician hurried toward the stage. Security quickly allowed him through. The doctor knelt beside Tommy. He gently checked the boy's pulse. Margaret rushed onto the stage. "Is he okay?" The doctor looked at her quietly. "He's exhausted." Tommy tried to smile. "I'm okay." But everyone could see he wasn't. Elvis carefully removed the guitar from his lap. He knelt beside Tommy once again. "You don't have to be strong every second." Tommy looked at him. "I wanted to finish." "You already did." "No," Tommy whispered. "I wanted to finish with you." Elvis gently held the boy's hand. "We're finishing together." The doctor leaned closer to Margaret. "He needs to sit down." A chair was brought onto the stage. Tommy rested against it. His eyes remained fixed on Elvis. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I ruined your concert." Those words pierced Elvis's heart. He shook his head immediately. "No, son." "You saved it." Tommy frowned. "What do you mean?" Elvis looked around the arena. "I've sung thousands of songs. I've played hundreds of cities. I've received awards I never dreamed of." He paused. "But tonight," he looked directly into Tommy's eyes, "you reminded me why I started singing in the first place." There wasn't a dry eye left in the building. Elvis stood and faced the audience. "I've got a favor to ask." 20,000 people listened. "If you've ever prayed, would you pray with me?" No one hesitated. One by one, people reached for the hands of complete strangers. Rows connected. Families embraced. Friends bowed their heads. Even security guards quietly joined hands. The musicians lowered their instruments. Silence spread across Madison Square Garden like a gentle wave. Under the bright stage lights, nearly 20,000 voices fell completely quiet. Elvis removed the microphone from its stand. He set it gently on the floor. No amplifiers, no music, no performance. Only a man kneeling beside a sick child. He bowed his head. "Dear Lord," he whispered, "tonight we're not asking for fame. We're not asking for success. We're simply asking for one more tomorrow for this little boy." A tear rolled down Tommy's cheek. Margaret closed her eyes, unable to hold back her sobs. The entire arena remained silent. And in that sacred moment, no one cared that the concert had stopped, because everyone understood they were witnessing something far greater than entertainment. No one spoke, not even after Elvis finished his quiet prayer. The silence itself had become part of the evening. For several long seconds, 20,000 people remained standing with their heads bowed. Some wiped tears from their cheeks. Others simply stared toward the stage, trying to understand how a concert had transformed into something that felt almost sacred. Elvis slowly opened his eyes. Tommy was looking back at him. The little boy smiled. It was a weak smile, but it was real. "I feel better," Tommy whispered. The doctor beside him smiled gently. "Just don't try to be a superhero." Tommy looked at Elvis. "I already met one." The audience laughed softly through their tears. Elvis shook his head. "No, son. The heroes are the ones who keep fighting when they're scared." He gently tapped Tommy's chest. "That's where the hero is." Charlie Hodge quietly walked onto the stage carrying a glass of water. Tommy accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," Charlie smiled. "I've worked with Elvis for years." Tommy looked at him curiously. "Has he ever stopped a concert before?" Charlie laughed. "Not like this." He glanced toward Elvis. "But somehow, I'm not surprised." Joe Esposito stepped beside Elvis. "The television crews are asking what happened." Elvis looked toward him. "Tell them the truth." Joe nodded. "And what's that?" Elvis smiled. "Tonight wasn't about me. It was about a little boy who reminded 20,000 people what really matters." The audience applauded once again, not because someone asked them to, because they couldn't help it. For several minutes, the applause simply wouldn't stop. People embraced strangers. Some parents hugged their children tightly. Others silently thanked God for blessings they had taken for granted. Even photographers had forgotten to keep taking pictures. Many simply stood there watching, knowing no photograph could fully capture what everyone had just experienced. Elvis looked toward the orchestra. He smiled warmly. "I think we've got one more song." The conductor nodded. "What'll it be?" Elvis looked at Tommy. "You choose." Tommy thought for a moment. Then he grinned. "How about If I Can Dream?" Elvis's eyes softened. "That's a beautiful choice." The musicians quietly prepared. The opening chords echoed through Madison Square Garden. Unlike earlier, this time Tommy didn't try to stand. He simply sat beside Elvis, wrapped in the famous red scarf, holding Elvis's guitar pick tightly in one hand, listening. Elvis closed his eyes. Every lyric carried new meaning. "We're lost in a cloud." His voice sounded different now, less like a performer, more like a man speaking directly from his heart. When he reached the chorus, something incredible happened. Without anyone asking, the audience joined him. Not loudly, not perfectly, but together. 20,000 voices became one. The sound filled every corner of the arena. Tommy looked around in amazement. "They're all singing!" Elvis smiled. "They're singing with you." A tear rolled slowly down Tommy's cheek. He had never felt less alone. When the final note faded, the audience stood once again. The applause lasted nearly 10 minutes. People refused to leave. They knew they had witnessed something that could never be repeated. Elvis carefully helped Tommy stand. He wrapped one arm around the boy. Then he faced the crowd. "I want you all to remember something." The arena became quiet. "There are people around us carrying battles we can't see." He looked at Tommy. "They don't always need our answers. They just need someone willing to notice." He paused. "If tonight teaches us anything, it's this: never walk past someone who needs kindness." As the lights slowly came up, most people expected the evening to end. But Elvis wasn't finished. He turned toward Margaret. "Would you and Tommy come backstage?" Margaret looked stunned. "Really?" He smiled. "I've got something I'd like to talk about." Backstage felt strangely peaceful after the emotional intensity of the arena. The noise from the audience slowly faded into the distance. Tommy looked around at the guitars, costumes, and framed photographs covering the walls. "So this is where Elvis lives before concerts." Elvis laughed. "Something like that." Tommy touched one of the guitars carefully. "You have a lot." "I do. Do you play all of them?" "I've tried." The room filled with gentle laughter. For the first time all evening, the conversation felt wonderfully normal. After a few minutes, Elvis asked everyone except Margaret to step outside. Charlie quietly closed the dressing room door. Only 3 people remained inside: Elvis, Margaret, Tommy. Elvis sat across from them. "I read every word of your letter." Margaret lowered her eyes. "I wasn't sure anyone would." "I almost didn't," he admitted honestly. "It was buried beneath hundreds of others." He reached into a drawer. "I've carried it ever since." He handed the folded letter back to her. The edges were worn from being opened so many times. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You kept it." "I needed the reminder." "Reminder of what?" Elvis answered softly. "That every ticket in the audience belongs to somebody with a story." Tommy suddenly looked sleepy. His eyelids grew heavier. Margaret noticed immediately. "We should probably head back." Elvis nodded. "But before you go—" He opened a small leather notebook. He wrote something carefully, tore out the page, folded it, placed it into Margaret's hand. "Don't open it until you're home." She looked confused. "What is it?" "Just a little promise." That night, after returning to their modest hotel room, Margaret unfolded the note. Her hands trembled. Inside was Elvis's handwritten message: "Tommy deserves every chance this world can give him." Beneath it, a phone number. The number belonged to one of Elvis's personal business managers, along with another sentence: "Beginning Monday morning, all of Tommy's medical expenses will be covered anonymously. Please don't tell the newspapers. This isn't for publicity, it's for him. Elvis." Margaret collapsed onto the bed in tears. She pressed the letter against her heart. Tommy looked at her. "What happened?" She couldn't speak. She simply hugged her son tighter than she ever had before. The following months were filled with uncertainty. The treatments continued. Some days were hopeful, others were frightening. There were infections, hospital stays, moments when doctors feared the worst. But something inside Tommy had changed after that night. Whenever the pain became unbearable, he touched the red scarf. Whenever fear whispered that he couldn't keep going, he held Elvis's guitar pick. And every morning, before another treatment, he quietly repeated the words Elvis had spoken on stage: "Let love be louder than fear." Those words became his strength. Against every expectation, Tommy survived. The doctors never called it a miracle. They simply admitted they couldn't explain everything. Years passed. The little boy who once struggled to walk across a stage slowly grew into a healthy young man. His greatest dream was no longer becoming a singer. It was helping children who felt the same fear he once had. He studied nursing, then specialized in pediatric oncology. Every child he cared for received the same promise: "You don't have to be brave every second." The exact words Elvis had spoken to him. In August of 1977, Tommy was 14 years old. He sat quietly in the hospital cafeteria when the television interrupted its regular programming. The news anchor removed his glasses. His voice was unusually heavy. "We have just received confirmation. Elvis Presley has died at the age of 42. The cafeteria became silent. Tommy felt as though the world had stopped. Without saying a word, he reached into his wallet. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was Elvis's guitar pick, still protected, still treasured. That evening, he tied the faded red scarf around his neck. Not because it still looked new, it didn't. Time had worn its color, but love had preserved its meaning. Nearly 30 years later, a frightened little boy arrived at Tommy's hospital. He had just been diagnosed with leukemia. He refused to speak, refused to smile, refused to begin treatment. Tommy walked quietly into the room. He sat beside the child without saying a word. Finally, he reached into his desk drawer. He placed an old guitar pick into the boy's hand. The child looked confused. "Whose is this?" Tommy smiled. It belonged to a man who once stopped an entire concert because he noticed one scared little boy. The child looked at him. "Really?" Tommy nodded. "He taught me something." "What?" Tommy smiled as he looked toward the hospital window. "Fame may fill an arena, but kindness can fill a lifetime."